Isolation and opacity control. In this video, we'll use isolate, change the opacity of a component, use unisolate all, create a section view, and create a named view. In Fusion 360, we want to carry on with our gear reduction housing assembly. This housing assembly has a lot of different hardware in it, and it also has several different housing components, including our housing mount. If we go into our housing component and we show all of the different components, in this case our front, our back, and the midsection of our housing, notice that there's a lot on the screen and we can't really see anything inside of the housing. So we want to talk about different ways that we can change the visualization of our assembly to make it easier to focus on specific components. The first thing that we can do is we can hide individual components or bodies by using the eye icon. It is also important to note that we are currently using component color cycling to easily identify the differences between components. This helps us identify things like hardware that's the same, and in this case, also different areas of our housing. So again, if we want to hide specific elements, for example, the housing mount, we can simply select the eye icon next to it and change its visibility. This can also be done for multiple components. For example, if I shift select all the hardware, I can right click and I can change its visibility by using show hide or by hitting V on the keyboard. We also have the option to right click and show all components or show all bodies. If anything's hidden and we use show all components, it will use the ones that are currently selected. For example, if I go to the top level, right click and use show all components, it'll bring all of them back. But what if we want to focus our attention on one component and we don't want to go through the process of hiding everything? Well, in this case, if we want to just work on the front housing, we can right click on it and select Isolate. Isolate will automatically change the visibility of all other components, allowing us to just see the one that we're interested in. We can then right click and select Unisolate to bring all the other components back. But what if you right click and you isolate it, but forget which component you were working with because maybe things are hidden? You can right click at the top level and select Unisolate All, which will bring all of those components back. Let's go ahead and hide the sheet metal lever, and let's hide the housing mount, and let's talk about opacity control. We want to expand the housing and focus our attention on the front cover. If we right click on the front cover, we have something called opacity control. We can change the opacity of components, allowing us to see directly through them while having them still be inside of the current assembly. The opacity can be changed in 10% increments from 100% all the way down to 10%, or you can use a custom opacity. The custom opacity gives you the option to use a slider on the selected component or multiple components. From here, now we can see the gears inside the housing. So if we go into our joints and we take a look at a revolute joint, for example, we can animate the model and we can look at the motion inside of the housing without having to hide or isolate any components. If we want to change the opacity back, we need to go back to that component, right click, and change the opacity back to 100%. Let's go back to a home view and let's talk about something else called named views. Named views are a way for us to create a custom view that we can go back to at any point in time. The named views folder contains views for things like top, front, right, and the home position. Also note that we are animating between those different views. Same thing if we use the view cube and we go between things like front, right, or top. But if we want to create a custom section view, for example, and we want to create a custom named view, we can do that by going to Inspect, Section Analysis, picking a specific planar face or one of the default planes. This can be done by holding down the left mouse button and selecting the YZ plane in this case. Once I create that view, I'm going to say OK. And now I want to create an isometric view that's looking into the housing, but it's not completely a front view. So I'm going to navigate to that view. I'm going to slightly rotate it. Then I'll right click on my named views folders and create a new named view. By selecting it again, I can rename it, and I'm going to call this Section ISO. It's important to note that the section view and the named view are not inherently linked. If we click on Section ISO, it goes back to this view position, but the section view being active has nothing to do with the named view. It's just simply a way for us to relate back to specific orientation. Named views can be used downstream in things like detailed drawings, so they're extremely helpful for us to create named views, especially if we want to look at specific areas of components. Let's create one more named view. Let's hide the front cover and the back housing. Let's rotate this around, and let's focus on the interaction between these two gears. I'm going to right-click and create a new named view, and I'm going to call this one Gear Close Up. So at any point in time, if I rotate back to a home view and I click Gear Close Up, I can go back to that gear view. You'll also note that this highlights a problem between these bolts and the large gear. These bolts are too long for this area in the assembly, and they're causing an intersection. And that's something that we can deal with later, but finding these problems can be done with tools like interference or by simply inspecting the model manually. If we were to use interference, we could select all the components in the assembly and compute to find those interferences. You can see here that we have an interference between the hardware and the housing, as well as the hardware and the gear, and we have some interference between two of our gears that slightly overlap. I'm not concerned with the gear overlap, but obviously the hardware is a problem that needs to be resolved. At this point, let's bring back all of our components by right-clicking on the top level, and we're going to use the option to show all components. We'll navigate back to a home view. We're going to hide our housing mount and the sheet metal lever, minimize the housing, go back to a home view so it fits the screen, and save the design before moving on.